Welcome to this meeting of Council. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the voices and images of those participating in the meeting and in the gallery may be captured as part of the recording. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. As councillors, we have all taken an oath to carry out our duties in the best interests of the people of Indigo Shire, and to do this in a fair and impartial manner. We are all committed to exercising the Council's powers and functions to the best of our skills and judgment. Apologies and leave of absence. Okay, Councillor O'Connor is on leave. Declarations of conflict of interest. Nil. Item 5 is open forum, where questions can be asked from members in the gallery. The first to speak will be Peter Turnbull.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a simple question regarding the township of Stanley. I'm just wondering if there is an update of the progress of that issue.
Thank you, Mark Florence.
Thanks, Peter, for the question. Yes, since the matter was addressed by Council, there have been follow-up meetings between Council officers, DWELP, which is Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and the CFA to try and resolve some of the impasse around some of the issues associated with the rezoning. It's been agreed that the amendment effectively will be split in two. The part of the amendment that can be progressed is the amendment to form a township zone for Stanley. The other piece of work will need to work more closely with the CFA around the rural activity zone to try and address some of the bushfire risk issues that were raised as part of the broader amendment. So that's the agreement that's been reached at officer level. Because the government had been in caretaker mode and they've only just come out of that, we're now able to formally represent that through to the government, and we should in the first part of next year be able to progress both the township zone amendment, which is reasonably straightforward, and also continue on the discussions around the rural activity zone.
Okay, thank you.
And just before you speak, I'd like to mention Section 77 of the Local Government Act 1989 in regard to confidential information. That's what 77(1) says: a person who is or has been a councillor or a member of a special committee must not disclose information that the person knows or should reasonably know is confidential information. That's for the information of councillors.
Mr Mayor and councillors, my two questions relate to agenda item 14.1, releasing confidential information. Those who take part in confidential meetings need reassurance that confidential input to conversations or meetings remains just that, confidential, otherwise confidence is eroded. There is a delicate balance between confidentiality and transparency. and we urge careful consideration of this matter in order that public confidence is not undermined. So regarding the motion, as mentioned, 14.1, Part 1 asks for a release of information from a confidential meeting. Part 2 asks for the development of a draft policy to address the release of information relating to confidential meetings. And Part 3 asks that the draft policy document comes before the March meeting of Council. My two questions are, 1, are the parts of the motion out of sequence? Surely the policy should be developed before the release of confidential information is considered. And my second question is, why has Councillor Goldworthy asked for release of information relating to the particular confidential meeting of 11 September 2018?
In answer to question 1, that will be part of the debate later during the council meeting. In regard to question 2, do you wish to answer that question, Councillor Goldsworth?
So I'd like to see our council to be open and transparent. There's a requirement under Section 3C of the Local Government Act that to ensure that transparency and accountability in council decision making. So I'm looking for that to occur. If you look at our neighbouring council of Alpine and the Know Your Council website, you'll see that 0% of their decisions are made in confidential sessions. It is important that we develop a policy. I've been asking for it for a number of years, and this matter is of such importance, I believe we should be looking at it sooner rather than later.
That relates to that meeting?
That's the first part of the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next questions are from Alan Davis from Woolshed Road. You've been away, have you, Alan? We haven't seen you for a while.
No, the northern weather is lovely. Why is it that Register of Public Roads, Woolshed Road, is marked as sealed when it's clearly not? Has the council previously applied for a grant and to cover their backsides have marked it sealed? Do you want three questions at once?
No, question 1.
Oh, the CO, I asked that.
The CO.
So he would ask the question all the way down the line.
Thanks, Alan. Look, I'll answer that first question. Woolshed Road is shown in the Register of Public Roads as a collector road. I think it's about 12 k's or something like that. You'll know better than me. Part of that road is sealed and part is unsealed. It's probably a glitch in the software that produces the report that it shows in that sealed or unsealed field. It shows it as sealed or unsealed, whereas clearly it's partly both. It's not a required field to display in the Register of Roads. What the register is required to show is that the road is maintained by council. It's classified as a C, which is a collector road, and it is maintained as a collector road in accordance with the road management plan.
I don't really accept that answer at all. Since we started on this business, we've been given the run round and run round and run round. I think this answer is just another run round. And the other one is the rural rates that are paid. What percentage goes to the rural and what percentage goes to the council, to the towns?
CEO?
Just a matter of interest that has been asked in the valley.
Thanks, Alan. Actually, the first time I've been at a meeting that you've been at, but I saw you a number of times on the live streaming before I joined council, so I'm familiar with your questions. We don't have a split routinely calculated to determine the spend of our rates or percentage of rates split between rural areas and towns. It's not really a feasible calculation to do. It's almost impossible to split between the two. We can't really tell how many townspeople use country roads and how many country people use towns roads. We don't know who uses our pools and things like that, whether they've come from a town area or a rural area. It's a whole range of factors, a whole range of things we spend money on. We just don't have that split, and it's not really efficient or feasible to keep separate records that give you that answer, so we can't really answer that question.
I have an email from the previous CEO of this council who state that rural rates and urban rates are two different budgets. Is that correct?
That's not a question you've asked here.
No, but you brought it up. You said it can't be worked out. But when I was on Old Cemetery Road, the previous CEO said to me in an email that Cemetery Road comes under urban rates.
This CEO couldn't answer for the previous CEO.
Okay.
They're very
You.
different.
And the other question that I asked, as you can see, it was afterthought. Actually, talking to another neighbour this morning, why are council files so out of date? This Register of Public Roads, if you noticed, has got 2013 on it. And I asked the girl here today, and she could not bring it up on her computer.
Sorry, Alan, it's quite a very vague and general question. Maybe if you can make the question more specific and send it to me, send me an email, I'll be happy to get an answer for you. I can't really answer that. It's a rather general question. I'm not aware of it, what paperwork's behind, or I'm not sure what you're getting at, so I can't really answer that.
That's why I gave you the copy of the front, because it's got clearly 2013. And when I asked Ian for the roads last year to be of the priorities of roads to be done, the list that Ian supplied me and the list that was passed by council are two different lists.
Let's see, answer questions offhand. I don't know the answer to that offhand.
We'll take
Thank
that
you.
question on notice. Thanks, Alan. Next one's Boyd Collins.
Evening, Mayor and Councillors. Through Mayor Gaffney, I would like to ask all councillors that voted against the motion to ask Goulburn Murray water representatives to Beechworth to enlighten all with facts and not fiction. Also, the Mayor stated Mr Dalhouse was more qualified than GMW reps, and the recent water case, VCAT and Supreme Court's judges did not accept his propaganda. So the first question I would like to ask, I would like to hear from all councillors that voted against the motion the reasons why, and I would remind council it is totally lawful to take and use water with a permit. Firstly, I'd like to hear from Councillor Price to confirm saying it would derail their water campaign or similar words to that. Through the Chair.
I thought the first question was to me. Regarding Mr Dalhouse, my belief is that Mr Dalhouse was never challenged over his conclusions at VCAT or the Supreme Court. The question in regard to councillors regarding the notice of motion, every councillor, including me, spoke either to or against the motion. All of those comments were recorded live, and you can view them on YouTube. I'm not going through them all again.
Is it still on?
My word,
alive?
It is. Yes. Yes.
I noticed that the answer from Councillor Price, but I was The last bit of it.
I think she
wasn't
said
real
more
clear.
than just one sentence. I think you've taken that completely out of context. If you wish, Councillor Price.
All I want to say is I can confirm they're not my words, and if you want to watch the full debate, as the Mayor has said, it is available on our YouTube for you to watch and to listen to it all within context.
Are they similar words?
All I'm going to say is they're not my words.
Okay. All right. I had a second question, but it's Councillor O'Connor's not here.
No.
Thank you.
She's on leave. The next person to ask a question is Neil Collins.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Why would Indigo Council not want the ratepayers to have the information on groundwater from Golden Murray water that was supplied by Murray Goulburn Water?
The information is not council information, it's Goulburn Murray Water, and if they want to make it public, they can, and I believe they have.
Yeah, they have, that's right. And why isn't council supporting that, what they're saying?
It's property of theirs. If they want to put it on their website, they can, and they have.
Yeah, they have, that's right. And why is Indigo Council so concerned over water availability when total licence volume is only 13% of the annual recharge and total usage of water is only 1.8% of the annual recharge? Why is Council so concerned over that small amount of usage when it's demonstrated that it's such a small amount that it's totally insignificant compared to the total allocations?
That information is challenged. It's been challenged at VCAT. It's been challenged in the Supreme Court, to my knowledge.
Well, when you say it's been challenged, it wasn't accepted as well. It wasn't the case that was put against Goulburn Murray Water certainly wasn't accepted by VCAT itself. They threw the lot out.
Could I just say, to my knowledge, Goulburn Murray Water were never a party to those proceedings. Never.
Well, I'm just
so
putting...
for you to say
I'm putting the facts. I'm putting the facts to you.
Well, it's not the facts. You're talking about the courts. Goulburn Murray Water were not party to those court cases. They were not. I can't keep saying it, and I'm not going to argue with you, but they were never party to those proceedings.
Well, I'm just putting these facts up now for council to be...
But you're saying that they were in VCAT, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm saying these are the figures that Goulburn Murray Water presented. And
Neil,
why is
I'm not here to debate you. I've heard you. You've repeated yourself over and over, and I've answered over and over. What's the next question? Okay.
The 19 meg current commercial use equals only 2.6 of the 714 megalitre total licensed allocation. That's the total commercial usage of at the moment, which is only 2%. So how council can accept the fact that the bores are going dry or it's draining the aquifer is just not acceptable.
So the bores aren't running dry?
Well, if the bores are going dry...
No, I just asked you. Are you saying they're not dry? They're not running dry?
Well, not through this mechanism, no. No, they're either too shallow or they haven't been used. There's two reasons why bores don't work. One is they're not deep enough. The other is they're not used to keep the aquifer open to the bore. That's the main reason.
Thanks, Neil.
And the other question is, what other information is not being made available to the Indigo ratepayers when this information was not made available?
I'm not sure of the exact section. I think it's section 89 of the Local Government Act says which matters should be held in confidential. Those matters, 3 of them are for personal matters, for legal advice, contractual matters, and there are other matters. They are the only matters that this Shire holds in confidential, and it's mentioned in the Act that they should be.
Yeah, well, none of
I'm not sure whether you want us to break the law or not, but
no,
we won't
I don't. But I expect all information that's commonly available to be accepted and to be transmitted to ratepayers as made available to Indigo Shire, so everyone can make up their mind what is actually happening.
Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, item 6, condolences. Item 7, confirmation of the minutes of previous meetings. The recommendation is that the minutes of the statutory council meeting and the ordinary council meeting held on 30 October 2018, as published on council's website, be confirmed. Do I have a councillor to move that? Moved by councillor Price, seconded by councillor Murdoch. All those in favour? Carried. Do we have any business arising from those minutes? Do we have any deputations and petitions? Item 10.1, the recommendation is that council accepts the October 2018 finance report. 2, adopts the additional capital budget variation as detailed in this report and attachment, including the following adjustments. A, 703,925 of additional capital income. B, 699,525 of additional capital works expenditure. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by councillor... Was that you, Trini? Did you put your hand up or you just pointed? You just pointed. Councillor Murdoch. Do you wish to speak to the motion, councillor Goldsworthy?
I'd just like to say that the financial report highlights that we're still on track and doing well, and the second part of it, note that there's $700,000 worth of additional capital works being undertaken within the Shire. That takes it up to $12.7 million that'll be undertaken hopefully within this year if we achieve our goals, so it's quite significant. Given that ordinarily we normally do somewhere between $6 and $8 million, I think $12 million or plus of capital works is quite significant. So well done to the staff, and I hope it keeps up.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch, do you wish to comment? Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour of the motion? Carried. Item 10.2, the recommendation is that council receives and notes the resolution of the attached unconfirmed advisory committee minutes and endorses the officer's comments. Somebody like to move that? Moved by councillor Trenery, seconded by councillor Price. Would you like to speak to that, councillor Trenery?
Just to repeat what I say most of the time when I move this, and that is in regards to and recognise the advisory committees that we have. They're a very valuable part of council, and we really appreciate the volunteers involved.
We certainly do. Councillor Price? Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour? Carried. Item 10.3. These are all matters that need to be discussed at council, and the resolution is that council accepts the attached Assembly of Councillor records. Moved by councillor Murdoch, seconded by councillor Shepherd. Do you wish to speak to it, councillor Murdoch?
No.
Price? No. All those in favour? Carried. Item 11.1. The recommendation is that council approves the planning permit application PP 180104, subject to the conditions included in the attachment 3, and 2, issues notice of decision to grant a permit. This is regarding camping and caravan park Mayday Hills. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Silence is golden. Would somebody like to move a recommendation, move a motion? Yes, Councillor Price, Councillor Shepherd, you seem to be...
Yes, I'd like to move an alternate notice of motion that we defer consideration of this application pending the receipt of advice from the applicant on the proposed long-term future of the Mayday farm area and an understanding of how the proposed caravan park would contribute to both the future of that area and the historic core of the Mayday complex.
Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Shepherd?
Just that with a master plan, I think at the moment there's talk of a master plan occurring, and I think we'll feel more confident in discussing and voting on this once we're aware how that fits into the whole consideration of this Mayday Hills area.
Would the seconder like to speak to the motion, Councillor Murdoch?
Just to reiterate is that if we're going to do planning in this area, which is a very important area of Beechworth, we really want to do it properly, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is for a whole plan, not just a part plan if we can. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 11.2, which is a 10-lot subdivision, Townsville Street, Beechworth. The resolution that Council approves the planning permit application 180116, subject to conditions at attachment 2. And point 2 issues a notice of decision to grant a permit. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Trenery. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Trenery.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously this subdivision has been fairly controversial. There's been a lot of discussions over it. There's been a lot of members of the community concerned about some of the aspects of it as well. I think all those, and the staff's done a really good job in putting and applying as far as I can conditions to this permit to circumvent the complaints that have been put in and also answer a lot of the complaints. I'll just bring them up if I can, Mr Mayor. Some of the aspects were the drainage, which is covered in the conditions. I know I've got a copy here somewhere. The drainage itself, the conditions itself applies. There was concerns about the runoff, the amount of runoff that's going to happen with this development. The runoff is going to be the same as it currently prior to development. Part of the conditions is going to arrest the flow, which is the concern from these developments. There's also conditions from North East Water. There's conditions with the road. Many of the conditions and concerns have been covered in this.
Okay, Councillor Goldsworthy.
It is with some sadness that this area will be developed, and it will be developed ultimately. From the time I was a small boy, it's always been a tennis court, and I don't want to see the area change in that regard. And there's been a lot of concern about how it will blend in with the historic aspect to the Beechworth area. But unfortunately, it is the way it's going to go. The council didn't own the site, and it was the tennis club that sold it. They have every right to want to improve their facilities, and hopefully that will happen in the fullness of time. What we're left with is a subdivision. It's not dissimilar from across the cycle path in Namshing Lane, where there will also be a new subdivision there. It will be an ideal location for those that are elderly and looking to downsize. The average lot size is relatively small when you look at what most Beechworth house sizes lots are. As my colleague, Councillor Trenery, has already stated, there is a requirement for detailed engineering designs for the road, entering in there, and the drainage, and a lot of other aspects to it. It's an 8-page document around all the requirements that will be put on the developers to see this go ahead. So I have confidence that the council staff will manage it so that it will be an appropriate subdivision. The concern will be around the type and style of the houses or units that are built there. I suspect, given the price that was paid for the land itself and its locality, they'll be at a premium. You won't see any cheap housing going on there. Those that buy those blocks will develop something for their future, and it may well be partly around retirement. So for me, I believe that this falls within the realms of our planning scheme, our decision guidelines, and that area will be subdivided, and this is the way we can control that development. So I support the motion as it stands.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Joint Councillor Price.
So this has been through quite a process to get to us here. We've had 32 submissions, and they were invited to come and speak and raise their concerns to councillors and to the applicants, which is a really important part of the process where we can hear them. A lot of those concerns resonated with us, and so we reflected that back to our staff and asked for guidance as to how a lot of the concerns within the submission could be incorporated. And the answers that we've been given is that they are in the conditions and they are also in the design guidelines as far as possible. So I agree with what Councillor Goldsworthy said. It's obviously it's of concern and of interest to the community when a site in this location is developed, but it is inevitable that it will be developed, and I think our council staff, along with the applicant, have gone as far as possible to make it something that's compatible with the area and suitable to Beechworth, and to not go against the character of the town as far as possible. So I'll support this motion.
Would anybody else like? Yes, Councillor Shepherd.
Today we also went and spoke to a neighbour who was concerned about the stormwater management, how that was going to happen, and we spoke to, again, our staff today, and they've assured us that a stormwater management plan won't occur without the inclusion of the neighbours' ideas and concerns, so that they will be included in the process and the discussion. So I feel more comfortable knowing that that person is going to be included and will have an input, and things won't go ahead if they're not happy. So that was one area that was concerning me. I now feel confident in that.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I've got some questions for the CEO. I believe that we had been told that no water would be stored on the subdivision, but when you look at the subdivision stormwater and overland flow schematic layout, between lot 3 and 4, there's a blue area which states proposed easement for stormwater quality treatment in favour of Indigo Shire Council, which intimates to me that Indigo Shire Council have asked for that easement within the subdivision. Is that right?
Mr Mayor, I might throw to our Director of Planning and Development, Mark Lawrence.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So what is submitted is a schematic plan, so it's a general indicative plan of what could result. But as been mentioned by Councillor Shepherd, the finalisation of a stormwater management plan would address what is actually approved, and yes, there may be, the best option may be some sort of on-site retention, but it also equally could it could be done in alternate ways. So it's a schematic plan where it's part of the application, but when it gets down to the actual build and construction of the estate, then the stormwater management plan will address what is the most appropriate course of action for the retention or the distribution of stormwater.
Through the CEO, so we can't take this plan as being what will actually happen on that development.
I suppose all I can do is reiterate what I've said before. So the stormwater management plan will be, once endorsed, will actually put into effect what will occur there. I'm just being advised that there's a couple of different issues there, that there is parts that are off the actual development site, which may be appropriate for retention or distribution, and the actual on the estate development site may be addressed in different form.
I also went to a site visit and spoke with a neighbour, and he's concerned about the easement for stormwater quality treatment in favour of Indigo Shire would be just like a mini swamp on the development, which concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is that there's an easement from this development to get rid of the storm water, which goes onto private land. And I'm of the opinion that the views of that private landowner hasn't been taken into account, and yet it shows an easement through his property, which is a property which is also an accommodation provider. He's very concerned about flood, and I probably share those concerns the way that it's been explained to me, that that drain is 600 mil in diameter, which is very, very large, and goes into Spring Creek. Spring Creek used to have trout in it. I remember it used to have platypus in it, and I'd hate to see it just being used as a drain. Could you allay my fears concerning that?
I suppose I'll just keep reiterating that the stormwater management plan will address all of those issues and won't be approved unless council is satisfied that the concerns that you've outlined or any other concerns that may come into play through the development of that management plan are addressed. And that includes, as Councillor Shepherd has mentioned, the specific input of a particular neighbour who has obviously a very close connection with the site in terms of adjacent property. So that'd be my comment.
Just making a comment, if this development was next to my place and they intended putting a stormwater easement through my property, I'd certainly like to be consulted. The other concerns I have is about the road. On page 36, it states, the subdivision provides a convenient and safe road network. Does that include the entrance and egress of the unnamed road, the road with no name, that goes, which is a road reserve, that goes into Albert Road?
So again, within the conditions, it's quite detailed that the road that you're talking about needs to be upgraded to the satisfaction of council to not only provide safe egress and ingress to the site, but also has the sufficient curb channelling, width, road pavement quality, etc. So the conditions are very specific in relation to the road matters.
That road, which is now a road reserve, is very narrow, and looking at it today, if there was a garbage truck going in and a car getting out, there's just nowhere that they could pass each other, so that the garbage truck would have to reverse into Albert Road, which is quite a busy road during peak hour. I just think it might be dangerous. is that road intended to be widened or just left the way it is?
So again, the application before council at the moment is for the subdivision. The actual detail of what occurs on the ground will be subject to the detailed engineering plans that need to be approved before any works can take place. So in relation to the roads, there are existing standards associated with internal roads for subdivisions, as well as those that access a collector road or an arterial road, such as Albert Road. So all of those standards and conditions will be applied when the engineering design plans are considered for approval.
In regard to the road, I'm not sure which road, but on page 3 of 8 on attachment 2, it talks about the access standard of 7.3 metres wide, which would be quite sufficient, but then it goes on that it's to accommodate on-street parking. Is that in regard to the entrance and egress road, or just the internal bowl road, the court?
So my understanding is the internal bowl road court, as you call it, through the progress of this application and consideration, has actually been enlarged to enable adequate circular movements of any garbage trucks, if you like, and also to provide provision for on-site parking, which is actually off the carriageway itself.
Yeah, it does say here street parking. I'm just wondering, is that on both sides of the road or just one? Because it doesn't say that. It says to accommodate on-street parking.
So again, my understanding without the detail in front of me would be on both sides, so as part of the circular movement, as you would see in most contemporary court arrangements.
Okay, Councillor Trenery, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to sum up, all the in the conditions is a Section 73 agreement in regards to not being able to subdivide any further. Planning by licensed surveyors has to be done. Design guidelines. These have to be compliance to the residential design guidelines. Underground services is in the conditions. Council infrastructure services requirements, which include footpaths, and any underground works has to be submitted and approved. Supporting technical documents to be submitted and approved on all these things. So a lot of the concerns have been covered, and engineers and the appropriate body will be going over this and making sure it's right, which is very important. But I think the key factor is Beechworth needs development. I deal with a lot of businesses in Beechworth through other roles, and it's not absolutely flat out. I'd like to see more people in this town, more people coming in that are not just through tourism, but are regular people that live nearby, and to have a development towards the inner city, towards the inner area of Beechworth can do nothing but help their local businesses. So I commend this motion to Council.
I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Division? All those in favour? Councillor Price, Trenery, Shepherd and Goldsworthy. Against? Murdoch and Gaffney. Item 11.3, the recommendation is the Council submits a nomination for National Heritage Listing for the Beechworth Historic Precinct. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, second by Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Goldsworthy.
So this is our historic area. This is something that's been on the agenda and on the public desire for a long time. Our Heritage Advisor, Deb Kemp, has put significant work into this, I believe, a lot of it in her own time. Will go a long way to protecting our cultural heritage into the future, and hopefully assist in gaining funds that are appropriate for it. Will ensure that the development of that area, in whatever form that may take, will be commensurate with what the community wants and our historic aspect to the Shire. So I'd say congratulations to Deb for putting this together, and I support this fully.
Councillor Shepherd.
So this has been a suggestion from the Heritage Advisory Committee and was K9 on the Heritage strategy, and they also were very keen for this to happen. So I'd also like to commend them for the work that they've done with Deb Kemp on bringing this to council. I know one of the concerns that people were often asking, well, what about heritage controls? Are there going to be extra heritage controls if we do end up on the federal list? And we've been told that the federal list is more an honorific and an opportunity to get more grants and more funding. What the existing state nomination carries the bulk of the heritage controls. So it doesn't seem that we're going to be having to concern ourselves about if we have a federal heritage listing, that it shouldn't give us more controls. We already have them with the state listing. So it will better reflect the significance of the place, and it's a very select list, and it would give Beechworth increased recognition throughout Australia, and it carries significant potential benefits. So I'd like to commend this.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Just to quote something from the discussion in the report, that Beechworth's historic precinct is unique in Australia's history in terms of being an intact, surviving Gold Rush administrative centre. It is the best surviving precinct in Australia with the capacity to tell the story of colonial and frontier governance. So I think that, as Councillor Shepherd said, a nomination to the National Heritage List would better reflect the significance of this place and help us to secure federal funding and to promote our town in such a way.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Would you like to sum up? Sorry about that. I was looking at the clock. The motion's been carried. Sorry about that, Councillor Goldsworthy. Item 11.4, that Council endorses the draft Ageing Well strategy and place it on exhibition for public comment until February the 8th, 2019, with the intent to consider the Ageing Well strategy at the February 2019 Council meeting. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Shepherd.
So there's no legislative requirement for council to have an ageing well strategy. So well done us, really, on deciding to have one. This is going out to you, the community, to look at until February, but we've had lots of consultation with the community beforehand. So we're confident that even though it's going to be over Christmas, you'll still have time to put in a comment, but lots of people have had opportunity to have input, and it's out there for you to look at. There's a significant projected population growth of Indigo Shire's aged community, which is with the largest growth expected to be in the 70 to 84-year-old age group, and by 2031 this age group is expected to grow 128% increase. So it's in our all best interests, if we look around at each other, for us to have an ageing well strategy. And I say you'll see in the report that already there's things that we're looking at including, and we've got Indigo community connectors, Indigo calling, time banking, and ride sharing programs, and there'll be a lot more that comes out of this strategy.
Okay, Councillor Murdoch.
Well, I think I can sort of match myself up with this particular motion in a way, but it is something that as people get older, we need more support, and we need to make sure that those people are able to move around their towns and do exactly the same, or not quite exactly the same activities as other people. But if you take, particularly in this shire, which is a heritage shire, there are places that make it difficult to get around, and those sorts of things need to be addressed in probably innovative ways. And The same with the social participation. As people get older, it's harder to move around. Quite often they don't drive as much. So we have to look at all these things and make sure that the older people in this community are able to still participate in the activities of the community.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price?
Just to congratulate the staff on the strategy as it stands. I know that there's been extensive work with the community to really have it so that it's a community-led initiative, and the actions that have come out of it I think are quite innovative for a small shire. So I'm really pleased to see that and encourage any further feedback from the community.
Okay, Councillor Shepherd? No. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Item 11.5, Q Springs Water Extraction Monthly Monitoring. The recommendation is that Council notes the Q Springs Water Extraction Facility Monitoring Report content and the action undertaken where required. Somebody like to move that? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Price? Councillor Murdoch? Would anybody like to speak to this motion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Item 12.1, Biodiversity Offsets. The recommendation is that Council invests in the establishment of 3 biodiversity offset sites in Indigo Shire, that Council secures the identified 3 parcels of land via an on-title agreement, that Council retains the offset credits generated for Indigo Shire use subject to payment of an internal price, and the Council notes that it is intended for the Beechworth to Yakandanda Rail Trail project to purchase 2 general habitat units of offset credits. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Goldsworthy.
It's probably a bit quick off the gun. I hope not to steal your thunder, but look, this just makes sense. It makes financial sense with the way that things are going in relation to biodiversity offsets. We need to be prepared for it. If we were to pay for them, it would be an extraordinary fee for Council and in some cases prohibitive to development. So for us to do it on land that is controlled by Council makes perfect sense. There isn't a cost to it, but it will be recouped several times over by having our own offsets. So I recommend it to Council to participate in and pass this motion.
Councillor Shepherd.
So this, at an Indigo Environment Advisory Committee, so this is again from another one of our advisory committee recommendations, an officer from the Baw Baw Shire did a presentation via whatever, the video link, talking about the Baw Baw's offset program, and it was, it sort of made a lot of sense to us that here we are having to pay offset costs for cutting down trees, for rail trail, for the Chiltern industrial land, and it was quite an expense. And then Jill Croom's done a great job, I think, in bringing back a report that lays it out quite, as you can see yourself, extensively on the opportunities for us to be able to have our own offsets within our own shire. It's going to cost us, what have I got here, $65,000 to establish, and there's, with a conservative market value of $600,000. So I think that's a great investment, and I commend this to you.
That's right, Councillor Price.
Yes, I too was at the Environment Advisory Committee meeting where this presentation was given to us, and it seemed like a really good solution, a really practical solution to a problem that we had that was outside of the Environment Committee's their remit, but they'd found a solution to our problem. With the Chiltern industrial site alone, I think we were looking at a couple of $100,000. Is that correct, in offsets if we were to just pay the fee associated with removing the trees on that site. And given that we also had the rail trail to consider as well, we did need a solution to this and a solution going forward for any projects such as this. So as much as there's a cost in achieving this, it far outweighs the cost that would have been associated with paying for the removals along the rail trail or with the Chiltern industrial land. And I'd just like to point out that this is new. This has come about due to a change in the native vegetation legislation. So I think 18 months or 2 years ago, we may not have had this same situation, but here we are and we've found a solution to it. So I'm very pleased.
Would anybody else? Councillor Trenery?
Just to comment on why we're doing this and why it had to be done. Some people might look at it and say it's unnecessary expense, but according to under the Victorian planning scheme, a planning permit is usually required to remove or destroy a native vegetation. If a permit is granted, native vegetation offset must be secured before native vegetation is removed. So what that became is very restrictive in the costing when you're looking at development. And it was going to obviously restrict development in some of our small towns, so this is highly necessary.
Councillor Murdoch.
And to be remembered in this, we are actually enhancing some of our environment in this offset business, so therefore, you know, we're going to look at some better environmental outcomes.
Right, Councillor Goldsworthy, would you like to sum up?
The great advantage of this particular scheme is that most of the land that we're looking at locking away is actually already heavily timbered, and we don't do anything with it. So it's terrific that we're able to utilise that to make a financial overall saving. So I'd say it's very important that we get into this. There may be opportunities in the future for growth and even to make some money out of it for council so that we can do more with it. But at the moment, it's suiting our needs very nicely.
I now put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Item 14.1, which is a notice of motion releasing confidential minutes. I just remind all councillors that during the debate about section 77 of the Local Government Act. Councillor Goldsworthy? Do you wish to read the motion, or I'm quite happy to read it?
I'm happy to move the motion if you'd like me to read it.
Well, it's not the recommendation. It's your motion, Councillor.
The Indigo Shire Council released the minutes from the confidential meeting that was conducted on the 11th of September 2018. Two, that we have the CEO develop a draft policy document that addresses the release of minutes and associated documents that have previously been declared as confidential in accordance with the Local Government Act. And three, have the CEO present a draft policy document to the March 2019 ordinary meeting of Council. And I'm moving that motion.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Trenery. Councillor Goldsworthy?
So on the 5th of November this year, the Mayor replied to an email from a concerned resident stating, this council is open and transparent. That is why council meetings are live streamed for the community to see. The debate and questions show why council has voted. This notice of motion asks no more than that. Is the council open and transparent, or are we afraid to empower our community to judge the decisions we make on their behalf? The decision that was made at the September meeting was made confidential because there was legal advice, and at that time it was entirely appropriate. That time has passed, and the matter is no longer, the matter related to is no longer current. The actual legal advice reiterated that which was already public information from the officer's report on the March of 2018 ordinary meeting at item 11.2. That information is applicable to all future applications of this nature. The risk and mitigation that required consideration were specific to this matter and not relevant to potential applications of the same type. By making this information available, we would be open and transparent. We would be fulfilling our obligation under the Local Government Act and Code of Conduct. We would be entrusting our community to understand the risks and recommendations that were presented to us. They will then be able to decide if the decisions that were made in the best interest of our Shire. For that reason, I believe we need to have this motion passed. We should be releasing the confidential information, and for a long time I've asked for a policy in relation to the release of confidential information. It's timely that this finally occurred.
Mr Mayor, could I just foreshadow an alternate motion?
Certainly.
If this motion were to be lost, I would foreshadow an alternate motion that would remove point 1 and make a change to point 3, that the draft policy document be returned to a meeting of council at a time that the CEO sees fit.
Does that need a second?
Not at this stage. Just foreshadowing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trenery. Sorry. Okay. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
I'd just like to refer to the Local Government Inspectorate's website where they talk about confidentiality, and they talk about that the Inspectorate supports open and transparent local government, but also recognises the legislative need to protect information. Confidentiality is also important in many cases to allow for effective council operations. I'd concur with what Councillor Goldsworthy said, that we pride ourselves on being an open and transparent council, but I also see that, and I agree that we should develop a policy that addresses these issues, but I don't think that we should take an ad hoc approach where we release minutes before developing this policy.
So, Councillor Shepherd.
I also agree that we do need a policy, and we have discussed this, and I know you've raised it before, Larry. We are always talking about transparency and community engagement and communication with the community. But I think this is this was legal advice to us. When you say that the advice is no longer current and then the matter was considered to council as being finalised, I don't think I agree with that. I think the legal advice is something that could be used later on in further discussion. So I just don't think it should be available to the community. The LGPRF report of meetings held behind closed doors gives a state average of 10% for meetings that are done in confidential, and our performance in 2016-17 was 1.9%. So I think we've got a good record on confidentiality, and I do think we do need a policy, but I don't think we should release this.
I've just got a question, but perhaps I could ask that question after you've spoken, Councillor Trenery. I'm not going to join the debate.
Well, that's okay. I'll listen to the question.
Oh, sure. There were two people appeared before council. This just wasn't a confidential meeting. This was a confidential special meeting of council. So, and it was well within the Act that it should be confidential. There were two people appeared before council at that meeting, and they were told that this was a confidential meeting. Have you spoken to them, Councillor Goldsworthy, to ask them whether it was okay by them, even though they were told it was confidential, that you intended to move a motion to take it out of confidential and put it in the public arena?
I believe that the people you're referring to were at a briefing meeting and not present during the actual meeting. So, and no, I haven't answered them, asked them.
Their remarks were certainly spoken about during that meeting. I just think that the council's got a certain integrity. If somebody is going to speak to the CEO about privileged information, that perhaps it shouldn't be put into the public arena. Do you wish to speak after the question, Councillor? Councillor Price.
I'll direct my question to either Director Mark Florence or to the CEO. Just wondering if you could foresee another situation where the advice we were given may be required again, or if it is in fact, as Councillor Goldsworthy said, not required anymore.
Councillor Price, I would suggest that the advice we received is absolutely applicable to other potential applications of a similar nature. And so the advice given hasn't become stale or lapsed, or would be relevant for future similar cases.
That's right, Councillor Trenary.
I may ask the question in a similar vein.
Sure.
To the CEO, the advice of that nature, do you believe that that was already covered off in the item that it related to back in the March meeting? Is there anything new in that and that wasn't already discussed by our planning department? And the implications of it, because some of that information related to tactics which will not be repeated.
I'm not sure what you're talking about in March, sorry, but we received specific advice, very specific advice, and we received advice which was in parts not available in the public arena, and was given as privileged legal advice, and again is applicable to other similar cases.
So, Councillor Trenary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We talk about being open and transparent. The way we can be open and transparent is releasing this information. I too agree that we should have had policies around this a long time ago. And I've been on council for 6 years, so it's something that we probably should have done earlier. We should at all times put out as much information as humanly possible. The ratepayers are our bosses. It's not our money, it's their money. It's not our council, it's their council. And we should respect that. And as to the legal advice, there's been a lot of legal arguments put right through VCAT on similar sort of subjects. I believe that legal advice pertained to that particular issue, which is no longer at hand. So I don't see a problem with releasing that information, but I think the priority is getting a policy, and I understand Councillor Price might be moving something into the future, but delaying that policy for any particular reason I think would be seen as trying to delay information going out. So I think March is plenty of time. Thank you.
I've just got a question for you, Councillor. You just said that you've been on council for 6 years. Have you ever known that a confidential special meeting of council minutes have ever been resolved to go into the public arena?
No, and we should start it now. And you'll note that when I moved the motion to put this into confidential, and at the time I moved the motion, I said the first thing I'll be doing when this is over and done with is trying to release it to the public.
I don't recall you moved it, but I take your word for it. So, Councillor Goldsworthy.
We're either open and transparent or we're not. It's that easy. There are councils within Victoria that have zero confidential meetings. I accept that for this particular one, we needed to have a confidential discussion. Overwhelmingly, the information that was in there was about tactics, and that was relevant at that time, because to bring it into an open forum would have been showing our hand. The legal advice that was given is freely available. It was in the predominantly in the planning discussion that this matter related to, and then later on, if you wanted to look at any of the VCAT or Supreme Court judgments in relation to it, you could find that advice. There's nothing outstanding, and it's something that should be released to the public. So just think about it. The question is, are we transparent or not? If you vote this down, you're not being transparent.
Now, I don't think that is a comment that needs to be made, Councillor. I think it's disrespectful what you just said, and I'd ask you to withdraw.
I disagree.
All right, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Division? All those in favour? Councillor Goldsworthy and Trenery. All those against? Price, Murdoch, Shepherd and Gaffney. Councillor Price.
So as I stated, I would like to move a motion that strikes out point 1, and so the motion would read from point 2 and change point 3 to have the CEO present the draft policy document back to a meeting within an appropriate time. I'll move that motion.
It's been seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Price. Sure.
What would you perceive to be an appropriate time?
It's certainly not for me to prioritise the workload of the CEO. I don't think that that this necessarily needs to go to the top of the agenda, as both yourself and Councillor Trenery have said. You've both been on council previously and have wanted to put a policy such as this in place before, and you haven't done so. So I think that we'll be very certain to get it within, at a minimum, 12 months' time.
Thank you. Councillor Price? Well, I think Councillor Price should speak to the motion before you start asking questions. She may address those issues during her motion. All right, continue, but I don't want you being disrespectful to other councillors by saying if you vote against this, you're doing this, because it's just not true.
Oh, thank you for the guidance, Mayor. This question is actually of the CEO. What would be an appropriate time, CEO? How long would it take you to get this policy up and going?
Look, I think any time after March would be suitable, would be appropriate. So I'd be comfortable from March onwards. But again, it's we'll be not doing other work, and I respect the view of some councillors say, well, if they see this priority, the priority of the councillors would do this later, I do it later. If the priorities would do it, I do it earlier, then I do it earlier.
Okay, Councillor Price.
Certainly, I think that all councillors can agree that we absolutely need a policy around how this takes place. But the idea that this is an easy decision, I think neglects all of the context. And so in assessing how I would vote in accordance with this motion tonight, I've referred to the inspectorate, who says that it is highly sensitive and needs to be developed appropriately. I was absent from the audit committee meeting yesterday, but I also know that they discussed it and they agree that it is also sensitive, but it also requires a policy. And so I think that it is really important that we develop this policy. I don't think the policy will preclude this information from being released into the future, but far be it from us to make that decision now without the guidance of such a policy. So I'll leave it at that at this point, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Murdoch.
I think that the controversy that we've just had is given us the knowledge that we really were missing a policy, and I think that this getting a draft policy and to council is important, but it has to be done properly. So, whether it's March, April or May, as long as we do get a policy within the 12-month line that Councillor Price was saying. Thank you.
Would any other councillors like to speak to the motion? Councillor Trenery.
It's hard to speak against the motion, obviously, in regards to bringing on a policy. It's essential that we have a policy, and the direction of the policy is hopefully releasing most of the confidential, not a policy keeping most of the confidential in, but I suppose we'll all vote on that at the time. I disagree that it can't be done by March, but that would be my priority. You need more than 3 people to have that priority, so I accept that this motion is what it is. Happy to vote for it as long as we get a policy, and I note that the CEO said he can do it just after March, so I'll look forward to that.
To Councillor Goldsworthy.
I support 2/3 of the aspect of obviously this motion. The only part that I don't is the altering of the date to leave it up to the CEO. In our motion we're required to give firm direction, and if he's saying that he can get it any time after March, then maybe April. Maybe you could amend your motion to change to April, but it's a draft policy that we're looking at. I would expect there to be some discussion prior to being developed. It's not a big ask. It is something that has been on the radar for a while, and I'd say the staff have failed to hear the requests about releasing information. It's not the first time we've had this conversation. And in regards to releasing confidential information, it's quite within our entitlement to do that at any stage. We're allowed under the Local Government Act to make a decision to release confidential information. We don't need a policy to direct it. The best thing that a policy will do is actually set in train a process for all confidential information and discussions to be examined and a discussion had around when they should be released, if they should be released. So it's not necessarily setting up the criteria, although that's evident within the Local Government Act. It's more around the process for doing it. So, in part, I do support the motion. It's only the setting of a long-ended date that I don't.
Does anyone else want to speak to the motion?
Can I ask you, Mr Chair, how I might amend the motion to reflect Councillor Goldsworthy and Councillor Trenery's comments that it might be received back to the April meeting?
Well, that's interesting with Local Law 3. I know if somebody else wanted to move that you amend it, it could be, that's right.
Could not the mover and the seconder amend it?
Yes, but they've got to amend it after somebody's moved that it be amended. Would you like to move that?
I'm happy
Councillor
to move
Shepherd?
that the motion get amended.
I thought Councillor Shepherd was going to.
Sorry.
I'd like to amend the motion so that we have April as the date that it's brought to Council.
Would you like to second that, Councillor Trenery?
Very happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Is the mover and seconder quite comfortable with that? Could you reread the motion regarding the date, Councillor Price? Yes, we're going to vote on the amendment, but I'm just wondering what the amendment, if you could just read the amendment, then I'll put the amendment.
If the mover and the seconder both agree...
Oh yes, we don't have to.
It can be adopted as the original motion.
Local Law 3.
So now am I summing up now, Mr Mayor?
Could you just read what the amendment is?
You just need to say that you're happy with the amendment and you're happy with
I'm happy with the amendment.
Yeah.
So you have already put an amendment now, so I did suggest that that's what we would do, but we haven't done it, so we're now putting an amendment.
No, we don't have to if the mover and seconder agree.
The mover and seconder agree with the amendment.
That's right, so I'm just putting that conversation, you had somebody move, and the chair said no, we want an amendment, so that's all we do. But listen, I'm happy to go with my original suggestion and say that the mover and the seconder change it, but I'm just saying there's now an amendment on the table.
The mover and the seconder can't amend the motion, someone else has to amend it, but if they're happy with the amendment, they can agree to it being the original motion. So an amendment was suggested, they both agreed with that amendment and they're happy with it, so it can become the original motion. As put by them.
I was going to put the amendment prior to them agreeing to the amendment, Councillor Trinity, and I thank you for your input.
Thank you. So am I summing up now?
Yes.
I think we've come to some level of compromise. I look forward to this policy coming through. I think that it will be appropriate that we're all aware of it, and it will set a tone that we all understand as we enter into a conversation, the parameters of our confidentiality and when that will be released. This council certainly prides himself on being open and transparent, and I think that the community can have full confidence in that, in the fact that we are seeking such a policy, and I think that we encourage each other to make sure that any information that we think should not be in the confidential arena be released and made public.
I now put the motion. All those in favour? Passed unanimously. Item 15.1 is the Mayor's diary. That's Councillor O'Connor's diary, so I can't speak for her. Item 16, general business. Councillor Trenery? Councillor Shepherd?
I'd just like to congratulate the community on coping with the Great Victorian Bike Ride as it's been going through our Shire. What a great benefit it's been to our economic growth. I think someone said that the ice cream shop had huge queues. So I understand though that it's been difficult for the community to negotiate the roads, the closed roads, get behind bicycles that are going across the middle of the road. But it's also wonderful to see families, all shapes and sizes out on bikes, and it just fits really well with our idea about getting out and being part of our environment. And I think isn't this some level of 40% or so people come back and spend money and look at our beautiful Indigo Shire again. So well done community, and well done on the Great Victorian Bike Ride, people.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
I'll just reiterate what Councillor Shepherd said. It's not quite finished in our Shire though. We've still got Rutherglen to go, and I'm sure they'll put on a terrific show. One thing I would like to publicise is we're given a copy of the Short Walks Guide. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth it. If you've got any visitors in the area, it's worth giving to them. It's just a series of short walks you can take throughout our Shire. It's a terrific little document. You can also see online the short walks, and hopefully it just continues to expand. It's one of the many facets to our tourism and local health products.
Councillor Murdoch.
We have some pretty talented people in our Shire, and no more talented than some of the people in Chiltern who at the moment are yarn bobbing the town with some wonderful crocheting, knitting around their posts, the poles. They're about to have a parade on Friday night at 5:30. The town looks great, and the post box looks really terrific. They put a Christmas head, Father Christmas head on it, and it actually looks almost like the real thing. But this is the innovation that we're having in towns at the moment, and it's part of the fibre or the vibe of the towns, and it's terrific. And I believe that following night Rutherglen's going to have a similar parade as well, and a similar celebration. So the towns are really starting to do things at the moment. So I'm sure anybody wants a good night out, that's where to go, Rutherglen and Chiltern.
Councillor Price.
I'd just like to thank the people that came along to the Rutherglen Economic Revitalisation meetings regarding the Lake King component. This is the one we've been waiting for. I think this is the jewel in the crown of the revitalisation, and it was fitting that we had quite a few people come and really hold us to account on our consultation that we've done. I just wanted a question for the Director of Infrastructure, just wondering how we're now going to go back to the community with an idea of the feedback that they gave us and how we'll proceed from there.
Councillor Shepherd.
No, I started. I'll ask the Director a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, through the Chair, I was just going to respond to that. Look, we haven't yet met and compiled the information from the feedback sessions, but that's certainly the plan to, I guess, sum up the feedback that we received from the sessions and provide that back to the community and let them know what we've heard and then what's next.
Okay.
Sorry.
Councillor Shepherd.
I just also wanted to congratulate Katie Gaston, who won the regional final of the Freezer Push Start Battle of the Bands. And she's a Rutherglen young woman, and she's about to record a new EP. So, and congratulate Sal Kimber and the youth team too on supporting our local youth and talent. And also, if I could congratulate the Beechworth Arts Council on the Spring Arts event, 5-week festival really of spring arts, and what a wonderful 5 weeks of events it was.
I now declare the meeting closed.